Hi friends, my name is Nataraj. In this video, I am going to talk about developing HibernateUtil class. The utility class in Hibernate application development is called HibernateUtil class. What this class contains? This class contains logic to create session factory, session objects. It's the main theme of this particular class. What is need of taking separate class? Generally, we take one class as a client application. There we create logic to create session object and what? Session factory object. That's not a good practice. Or sometimes we write persistence logic in the DAO classes. There also we can write what? Logic to create session factory and session object. That is also not good practice. Why? Because in one project, there will be many application who wants to talk with the database software, and writing same logic to create session factory and session objects is a bad practice. Similarly, there is a chance of having what? Multiple DAO classes to talk with what? Database software having persistence logic, and writing logic of creating session factory object, session object in multiple DAO classes also bad practice. Then what is the good practice? The good practice is write in a separate class and start using that class either in multiple application who wants to talk with the database software from the project, or in multiple DAO classes who want to talk with the database software from what project. In real practices, no doubt we use DAO classes support to develop the persistence logic, to simply develop what? Persistence logic, no second thought in that. So instead of writing logic of creating session factory, session objects in every DAO class, write only for one time in HibernateUtil class and start utilizing in what? Multiple places. So that's why the concept of HibernateUtil class is very simple. It maintains the logic to create the session factory object and to create the session object, and it also maintains the logic to close the session object and to close even what? Session factory object. So that much simple it is. It's not a great thing, but I would like to talk with some best practices, how best we can develop this HibernateUtil class. That is my basic concentration. Generally, session factory is one per application and one per database. So that means in the entire application or project, for one database we'll take one session factory object. That's fine. But when it comes to session objects, we'll try to take multiple sessions. Generally, for every thread who wants to talk with the database software, we will try to take what? One session object. Suppose 10 threads are started in your application, and those are interested to talk with the database software through DAO classes. So for every thread, we will try to take what? One session object. That means we have to take a session object on one per thread basis. So that means we have to take session factory one per application, and we will try to take, what is that? Session object on one per thread basis. Create session factory object on one per application and database software. Create session object on one per thread basis. So this is very important. Suppose you have a web application. 100 requests are coming to my web components, and this web component wants to take the support of DAO classes to interact with the database software. In the entire application, we'll try to work with a single session factory object. But for every request, one thread will be created. We'll try to create one session, and we'll make that session to talk with what? Database software by using the persistence logic that is there in what? DAO. So the ultimate conclusion is, in general, in entire project or application, we'll try to work with what? Session factory object, and we also create per database basis. But session object we'll try to create per thread basis. I am not talking about HTTP session object of web application. I am purely talking about what? Hibernate session object. Here also I am purely talking about what? Hibernate session factory object. When it wants to create session object on one per thread basis, thread local is the best. Thread local is ultimately best, no doubt in that. In previous video, I really talked about thread local. If you want to maintain any object having thread scope, having what? Thread scope, definitely you have to take the support of what? Thread local. No second thought in that. Definitely you have to go for what? Thread local support. Yes. So I want to involve thread local, and I want to write lot of logics in what? HibernateUtil class. Having logic to create session factory object, session object, and also having logic what? To close the session factory object and what? Session object. So let me summarize all these things. Generally we take session factory object on what? One per application and one per database, and we take Hibernate session object one per thread basis. That's why we try to keep that object in what? Thread local. Instead of writing logic of creating session factory and session object in multiple DAO classes or multiple parts of what? Application or project, it is recommended to write only for one time. That one place is nothing but HibernateUtil class. So let me keep all these points in mind and let me write my logic. So here is my HibernateUtil.java. It's a normal class here. It need not to extend from any other classes. I am taking one thread local object. I am initializing one thread local object, telling that it is capable of holding only session object. That means I am going to create thread local object by involving generics. So private static thread local, because I am going to use this one in multiple static methods of the class, because I want to take all methods as what? Static methods, so that I can call them without object directly on the class name. Because you know that static methods are instance independent methods. Moreover, whenever HibernateUtil class is loaded, I want to see certain things automatically initialized, certain things automatically created by activating Hibernate framework, and that is possible through static variables and what? Static blocks. That's why I am going to use a lot of static content in this particular class. Very simple. Whenever HibernateUtil class is loaded for the first time, I want to see Hibernate framework is activated, session factory object is created. This kind of activity is happening the moment HibernateUtil class is what? Loaded. And that is possible when you deal with more and more what? Static environment. So thread local session, thread local is equal to new thread local session. Thread local session, thread local is equal to new thread local. The moment class is HibernateUtil class is loaded, this thread local object is ready, and that too it is created only to hold Hibernate session object. It is not ready to hold other objects. And moreover, generally this class will be placed in a package called com.nt.util. So com.nt.utility, not util. Generally people takes what? Utility. So now I am taking one static block here. Here I will write a logic to create what? To activate Hibernate framework and to create Hibernate session factory object. So here I am taking what here? Private static session factory. It's a reference variable which can hold session factory object. So let me create the logic of activating Hibernate framework, creating session factory object in static block. Why? I said the moment anyone loads or JVM loads HibernateUtil class for the first time, I want to see Hibernate framework getting activated and session factory created. I don't want to see people doing something on this class, then Hibernate getting activated. So that's why the better place is what? Static block. So I have gone for what? Factory is equal to factory. That means I am very much interested to go for eager activation of Hibernate framework, early activation of Hibernate framework, so that If Hibernate framework is ready, a session factory object is ready. So whenever we want, you can use it to create the session objects. That's the intention behind it. So factory is equal to new I'm just using method chaining concept. You know that this one will activate Hibernate framework based on the jars that are added to build path. Here is my configure method. Here I'm assuming com/nt/cfz/hibernate.cfz.xml file. In other video I talked what this method will do. It read both XML files data and maintains what? In-memory metadata. Next, I call this method build session factory. This will happily create what? Session factory object and returns it. Here I used what? Method chaining concept. Here object is created. On that object configure method is called, that again returns configuration object. On that one build session factory method is called, and this method happily what? Returns the session factory object. Happily returns what? Session factory object. So now I would like to take one method, public static session. What is that? Get session. Public static session get session. So here I am calling one method. It's a user defined method here. Whenever this method is called, I want to return session object by verifying whether it is there in thread local object or not. I already said I'm going to create session object on one per thread basis. Session factory is what? One per application and one per database. So one session factory object per application and per database. But session object I am decided to create on what? One per thread basis. Because I don't want to see 2-3 threads who are interacting with the database software using single session object and giving me data consistency problems. That's the reason I am interested to take session object on one per thread basis. And whenever you want to create any object specific to each thread or having thread scope, better to maintain in what? Thread local. So let's see what is the logic I should write here. First I should verify for this current thread, is there any session object in the thread local? There, get it and return it. If not there, create it and place in thread local and return it. So very simple concept here. A session is equal to null. You know that all local variables in the method should be declared at the top of the method definition. So that is a good practice to follow. Here thread local dot get double equal to null. Thread local dot get double equal to null. If at all whatever thread that is calling this method is not having any session object in thread local, what we should do? First create it. How to create session object? Create HB session object. How to create? Session is equal to factory dot open session. Factory dot open session. Okay, now what should we do? We should keep this object in thread local. So let me keep that object in thread local. How to keep object in thread local? Thread local dot set session. That's nice. If not there, we created and we kept in thread local. If session object is already there in thread local, if session object is what? Already there in thread local, then what we should do? Very simple. Else session is equal to, what is that? Thread local dot get. Okay. In thread local, if session object is not there, it is creating session object and keeping in thread local. If already there, it will get from thread local. But at the end, it is returning what here? Return session. At the end, it returns session. Ultimately, it gives one session object here. Either it will create and return, it will locate and return. That depends upon what? Further thread, whether session object is already there or not. So that based on this logic, I can definitely say thread local object is used to create session object on one per thread basis. Then I want to take one more method having the ability to close the session object. So let's see. Public static, because I want to see DAO classes and other parts of the project calling this method directly on the class name. That's why I am designing every method as what? Static method. So public static void, what is the method? Close session. And here I just want to First check for this current thread whether session object is there in thread local or not. If thread local dot get doubly not equal to null, if available, then only first what I want to do, get the session object. Session SCS is equal to null. Then what is that? Session is equal to thread local dot get. Yes, I will get access to session object of the current thread. Then close the session object. Session dot close. Once it is closed, better to remove from thread local. So what is that? Thread local dot remove. End of what? If condition. End of what? Close session. Once again observe, when someone calls HibernateUtil dot close session, first I am going to thread local, checking for the current thread session object is available or not available. Then get that one. Yes, I closed it. It internally closed the connection with the database. I am removing from thread local. Why should remove? When same thread asks for another session object, okay, then there is a possibility of creating what? New session object for that thread, and it will be placed in what? Thread local for that reason. Then lastly, what is that? Public static void close session factory. Now you might have got idea why I have taken session factory as a static variable, because I am designing all these methods as what? Static methods. That's the reason I am taking session factory even as what? This one. So here session factory, close the session factory. Here very simple, you just call factory dot close. That's it. Public static void close the session factory, factory dot close. End of the class. A typical HibernateUtil class contains what? Logic to create session factory object. Yes. And logic to create and return what? Session object on one per thread basis. And logic to close session object. And logic to close a session factory object. Now onwards, any DAO class, any application who wants to interact with the database software by using Hibernate persistence logic just uses what? Class support to get access to session object, to get access to session factory objects. Let us assume in some DAO class, suppose some DAO class I called HibernateUtil dot get session. I called HibernateUtil dot get session by using thread 1 whose name is T1. Okay, let's see what happens. Let us assume I am calling this method for the first time. So first time HibernateUtil dot get session. HibernateUtil. First JVM loads this class. When JVM loads the class, first what happened? Static member variables will be initialized. Due to this thread local object will be initialized. That means eager instantiation of thread local object. Right, then static block executes. Because of this static block, Hibernate framework will be activated. Both XML files data will be read, in-memory metadata will be created. Having that in-memory metadata and other information internally what? Session factory object is also created. Because static block executes now when class is loaded. First static variables will be initialized. That's why thread local object is created. Then what? Static. Even this also will be reference variable also will be ready. So because of static block what? Session factory object will be created. Now control comes to what? Get session. Get session. Yes, control comes to get session. So thread local dot get null. Right now T1 is my thread. It goes to thread local and checks is there any object on the name of T1 thread. No, it just know that thread local object is created, no question of having any object. That's why returns true. So then creates one session object and keeps that session object in what? Thread local on the name of what? T1. That means this session object becomes specific to T1 thread and returns that session object. So now let us assume I called HibernateUtil dot get session. HibernateUtil.getSession one more time. From the same DAO class using same thread T1. Class is already loaded, that's why it won't try to load one more time. Directly what method will be called? GetSession. So GetSession means this time it will check in the thread local for thread T1 session object is already there or not there. There. That's why control goes to what? Else block, because this condition becomes false. So from thread local it gets the session object and returns that session object. That's nice. Let us assume after completing all the persistence operations, I called HibernateUtil dot close session, and I also called HibernateUtil dot close session factory. So when I call HibernateUtil dot close session, control comes to what? Close session. It will check for current thread, is there anything in thread local? Yes, there session object is there, because we are calling from what? Same thread T1. Both are called from thread 1 T1. This is also called from what? Thread 1 T1. This is also called from thread 1 T1. So that's nice. So gets what? Session object from thread local, closes it, because of that connection with the database will be closed, and that will be removed from thread local. So if same thread asks for one more session object, no problem. Okay, this time one more session object will be created and will be kept in what? Thread local. So next what method? Close session factory. So when this method is called, simply what method will be called? Factory.close method. Happily session factory object will be closed. Indirectly what? Hibernate framework will be deactivated. So like this people develops what? HibernateUtil class. HibernateUtil class having logic to create a session factory, session, and having logic to close a session, having logic to close a session factory. So session factory we generally create one per application and database. Session object we create on one per thread basis. For that purpose we take the support of thread local. If you want to have more details about thread local, refer previous video where I have talked exclusively about what? Thread local. That's why stop writing logic to create session object, stop writing logic to create session factory objects in the DAO classes. Always prefer writing those logics in what? Separate utility class called HibernateUtil. That's not a fixed name, any other name you can take, and start using in multiple DAO classes. So this is the industry's best practice towards creating what? Session factory object, session object, and also best practice towards closing what? Session factory comma session objects. I hope you benefited with this video. Okay, thank you.